Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be tackling something that's super relevant to, well, pretty much anyone building or managing products out there.
Yeah.
It's all about data-driven decisions.
Oh, data. Everyone's favorite topic.
Yeah, right. But specifically, we're going to be looking at how to balance two key types of data, qualitative and quantitative.
Yes. The classic duo.
And to guide us on this journey, we've got a fantastic framework laid out by Frank O'Neill, a real expert in the world of product management. He's got this awesome blog post where he really breaks down.
Oh, I've read that one. He's got some great insights in there.
He really does. So get ready because we're about to go deep and uncover some seriously actionable takeaways.
I'm excited. I always find that the most interesting stuff emerges when you start looking at the interplay between those two types of data.
Absolutely. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's make sure we're all on the same page. When we talk about quantitative data in this context, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, think of it as the hard numbers, the things you can measure. Website traffic, app downloads, conversion rates, all that good stuff.
So if I'm tracking how many people are visiting my website each day.
Yep, that's quantitative.
Yeah.
It's giving you a snapshot of what's happening, but
there's a but coming, isn't there?
always a but.
Yep.
Those numbers alone don't tell you the whole story. They're like seeing a line go up on a graph. Great, something's increasing, but is it the right thing?
That's where qualitative data steps in, right?
Bingo. Think of it as getting under the hood, understanding the why behind those numbers. Why are people visiting your website? What are they hoping to find? What's their experience like?
So if quantitative is like looking at your speedometer, qualitative is popping open the hood and seeing what's making the engine run.
Perfect analogy. And just like a mechanic needs to understand both the gauges, NAD, the inner workings, a good product manager needs to be fluent in both data languages.
I love that. Now, Frank O'Neill's framework for balancing these two starts with something he calls defining objectives and key performance indicators, or KPIs.
KPIs, the cornerstone of so many strategies. But here's the cool thing about Frank's approach.
What's that?
He doesn't just focus on those hard numerical KPIs. He actually incorporates qualitative KPIs as well.
Qualitative KPIs. So it's not just about hitting a certain number of downloads, it's about understanding why people are downloading in the first place.
Exactly. For example, a quantitative KPI might be to increase trial signups by, let's say, 15% this quarter. But a qualitative KPI could be to identify the top 3 reasons why users are abandoning the sign-up process.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about the what, it's about the WHY.
You got it.
Yeah.
And understanding that why is what allows you to make truly informed decisions, whether you're prioritizing features, evaluating a product launch, or just trying to get a better grasp of how people are interacting with your product.
That makes a lot of sense. But now I'm curious, how do we actually gather this qualitative data? It's not as simple as just pulling up Google Analytics, right?
You're right. It's a bit more nuanced than that. It's about tapping into the minds of your users. Think user interviews, where you sit down with people and really delve into their experiences.
I've always found user interviews to be incredibly insightful.
They really are. Or A/B testing, where you experiment with different versions of a feature to see what resonates best. You can even learn a lot from analyzing customer support tickets. What are people complaining about? What are they struggling with? That's pure gold right there.
It sounds like there's a real art to both collecting and interpreting this qualitative data. It's not as straightforward as just looking at a spreadsheet.
You're spot on. It requires careful listening, observation, and the ability to read between the lines. You're looking for patterns in user behavior, but you also have to be open to those unexpected insights that can completely change your understanding of a problem.
So it's about being both analytical and intuitive.
I'd say so. Now, a question that often comes up is whether one type of data is more important than the other.
Yeah, I was just about to ask that.
And the truth is, it depends. It depends on your objectives, where you are in your product lifecycle, and the specific questions you're trying to answer.
So it's not a case of choosing one over the other. It's about knowing when to lean on one more heavily than the other.
Exactly. And the key is to always be aware of the limitations of each data type. Use them together to create a more holistic, well-rounded picture.
Okay, so we've got a good grasp on the what and the WHY of qualitative and quantitative data. But how do they actually work together in practice?
Well, one of the key areas where this balance really comes into play is in data analysis itself.
So this is where we go beyond just collecting the data and start actually making sense of it all, connecting those dots and figuring out what the data is telling us.
Exactly. And Frank O'Neill's framework breaks down data analysis into 3 key phases: exploration, validation, and integration.
Exploration, validation, and integration. It sounds like we're about to embark on a data-driven detective mission.
I like that. And you're not wrong. In that exploration phase, you're really diving into your data, looking for any patterns, trends, anything that jumps out at you. Think of it as gathering those initial clues.
So you might be noticing a spike in user engagement on a specific feature, or maybe there's a sudden drop-off in conversions.
Right. Those are your starting points, the things that make you go, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But here's the important part. You don't jump to conclusions based just on those observations.
Gotcha. So that's where validation comes in.
Exactly. And this is where qualitative data really shines. You use that qualitative data, user feedback, survey responses, even those comments people leave on social media. You use all that to validate the patterns you've observed in the numbers.
So let's say I'm seeing a drop-off in conversions. I might reach out to some of those users who abandoned their carts and ask them, hey, what happened? Why didn't you complete the purchase?
That's a great example. Maybe the checkout process was too complicated, maybe they got distracted, or maybe they just weren't convinced of the value. Qualitative data gives you that all-important context that numbers just can't provide.
And this validation phase, it's crucial because what looks like a problem based on the quantitative data might actually be something completely different once you get the full picture, right?
You hit the nail on the head. It's amazing how often a seemingly obvious trend in the numbers turns out to have a totally unexpected explanation once you bring in that qualitative data. It can really flip the script.
Okay, so we've explored our data, we've validated our findings. What's the next step in this data analysis journey?
That brings us to integration, and this is where things get really interesting.
Integration. Sounds intense.
It's all about weaving those two data types together, the quantitative and the qualitative, to create a truly comprehensive understanding of what's going on.
So it's not about picking a side, team quant versus team qual. It's about blending those insights together into something much more powerful.
Precisely. And you know what Frank O'Neill emphasizes in this phase? The power of storytelling.
Ooh, storytelling. I love a good story.
It's not enough to just present a bunch of numbers and quotes. You need to craft a narrative that explains what the data means, why it matters. It's about making that data come alive.
We are wired for stories, aren't we?
We are. And when you can tell a story with your data, it becomes way more impactful, more memorable, and it helps you connect with your audience, whether it's your team, stakeholders, or even your users.
So instead of just saying, hey, our conversion rate dropped by 10% last month, you might say, we noticed a dip in conversions, and after talking to some users, we found out that many of them were abandoning their carts because they found the checkout process super confusing.
Now you're not just throwing a statistic at them, you're sharing a story about the user experience. And that story is much more likely to lead to action.
It makes me think about those fancy dashboards with all the colorful charts and graphs. Without that narrative, without that story, they're just pretty pictures.
They can be. Data visualization is important, but it's only part of the equation. A good data story doesn't just show the facts. It provides context, it highlights the so what, and it points towards insights that can actually drive change. That's the real magic.
This is great stuff. Frank O'Neill actually gives some really solid real-world examples of how to apply this balanced approach to product management. One of those examples is feature prioritization.
Ah, yes, feature prioritization. Every product manager's favorite game.
It can be tough. Limited resources, a gazillion potential features, and you need to make those tough choices about where to focus.
And everyone's got an opinion about what's most important, right?
Yeah.
But a data-driven approach, one that balances the quant and the qual, can help you make those decisions objectively and strategically. And it starts by understanding your goals.
So before you even start thinking about features, you have to ask yourself, what are we trying to achieve here?
Exactly. Are you aiming to boost user engagement, drive more revenue, or maybe improve customer satisfaction?
You've got to have that North Star.
Once you've got those goals locked in, then you can start assessing potential features based on their impact on those key metrics. Quantitative data can show you things like which features are used the most, which ones are driving conversions, and which ones seem to correlate with positive user feedback.
Right, so the numbers can tell you a lot.
They can. But remember, it's only half the story. We need that qualitative data to understand the WHY behind the numbers.
So just because a feature has super high usage rates, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a hit, right?
Exactly. You might dig deeper with some user interviews or surveys and discover that people are only using that feature because they haven't found a better way to do what they need to do.
They're hacking it.
They might be. The feature might be clunky or confusing, but they're using it out of necessity. That's where those qualitative insights can really challenge your assumptions and lead to better product decisions.
This is making me rethink my whole approach to prioritization. But what about after a product or a feature is launched? How does this balanced data approach apply to product launch evaluation?
That's another critical area where it's crucial. It's so easy to get caught up in the hype of a launch, but it's super important to track both types of data, the quant and the qual, to see how things are actually going.
So you're keeping an eye on things like adoption rates, those initial reviews, what's coming through customer support, all those signals that tell you if your product is truly resonating with your target audience.
And here's where qualitative data is especially valuable. You don't just want to know if people are using your product. You want to understand how they're using it, what they love, what they find frustrating, what suggestions they might have.
So you might see a big spike in downloads in those first few weeks, but then things start to taper off. The numbers tell you there's a problem, but it's those user reviews, social media comments, the support interactions that can help you figure out why.
Maybe there's a snag in the onboarding process, or maybe they're just not finding that value they were hoping for. Qualitative data gives you those nuggets of insight that can help you adjust your course and make sure your product is really meeting those user needs.
This is incredibly helpful. But I'm curious, what about those situations where the quantitative and qualitative data seem to be telling two different stories?
Yes, that's where things get tricky. And it happens more often than you might think. You might have those numbers looking all positive and rosy, but then your qualitative data is whispering about some underlying issues.
So it's like those customer satisfaction scores are super high, but then you notice a bunch of complaints rolling into customer support about a specific feature.
Right. Or maybe your sales figures are through the roof, but then you start hearing from users that they're only using your product because they haven't found a better option yet.
Ouch, that's got to sting a little.
It can. So what do you do when you get these mixed signals? Do you trust the numbers or the anecdotes? Well, that's the million-dollar question.
And I bet there's no easy answer.
There really isn't. It takes careful analysis, a critical eye, and honestly, a willingness to question your own assumptions. Sometimes it means digging deeper into the data to see if there's something skewing those results. Other times it might mean collecting more data to see if those conflicting signals keep popping up.
It sounds like there's a real art to navigating those gray areas where the data isn't so black and white.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that makes data-driven decision-making both exciting and challenging.
I bet our listeners are eager to hear more about how to handle those tricky situations where the data is playing hard to get. But for now, we're going to have to take a quick break. We'll be right back to wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of data-driven decisions. And we are back, ready to finish up this deep dive. You know, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have a lot of practical stuff about how to balance those two data types, the frameworks, the techniques.
Yeah, we really got into the nitty-gritty. But I feel like there's this other layer to this whole thing that Frank O'Neill talks about in his post.
Oh, yeah. He touches on something really crucial. It's not just about the how-to, it's also about the mindset you bring to data analysis in the first place.
Mindset. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
It's all about approaching data with a sense of curiosity, a healthy dose of skepticism, and a good bit of humility, too.
So not just taking the numbers at face value.
Right. It's about recognizing that data isn't just some source of answers, it's actually a source of questions.
Data as a source of questions. I like that. So it's not about finding the right answer, it's about asking the right questions.
You got it. And those questions often come from that back and forth between your quantitative and your qualitative data. The numbers might be pointing you in one direction, but then boom, some feedback from users, some anecdotal evidence throws a wrench in the works, makes you question everything.
It's like they say, the map is not the territory. The data is a representation of reality, but it's not the whole picture.
Love that analogy. And, it's in those moments of surprise when something totally contradicts what you thought you knew. That's where the real innovation happens.
So it's not about being scared of those conflicting signals. It's about seeing them as opportunities to learn something new.
Exactly. You have to remember that data isn't always perfectly organized. It can be messy, full of contradictions. But it's in that messiness, in those unexpected twists and turns, that you often find the most valuable insights.
It reminds me of those times when you're working on a product and you think, yes, this is the perfect solution, and then you talk to a user.
And they hit you with something totally out of left field that makes you rethink everything.
And suddenly you're back to square one. But you know what? It's a good thing because now you have a fresh perspective, a new way of looking at the problem.
Those are the moments that make this whole data-driven journey worthwhile. It's all about being open to learning, to changing your mind, to letting the data guide you, even if it takes you down a road you weren't expecting.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like we've just dipped our toes into this topic, but I'm already thinking about data in a whole new way.
Me too. And that's what these deep dives are all about, right?
Sure.
To spark that curiosity, to get people thinking differently, and to give them those tools and insights to make better decisions.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up here, is there one key takeaway you would want our listeners to walk away with today?
I think it all comes back to that idea of mindset we were talking about. Don't be afraid of the messiness of data. Be curious. Keep asking questions. Don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions. And always remember, data is not just about numbers. It's about people.
Perfectly said. So to all our listeners out there, go forth, dive deep into your data, and as you do, remember to keep that balance in mind, the what and the why, the quantitative and the qualitative. Bring your whole self to the table.
And who knows, you might uncover those game-changing insights that lead to your next big breakthrough.
That's all the time we have for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this data-driven adventure, and we'll catch you next time.